Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into a question that I bet has crossed your mind.
Mm.
Are we, as humans, truly equipped for the way we live now? If you've ever felt stretched thin, like you're constantly trying to keep up, maybe even when you feel like you're putting in the effort, then, well, this is for you.
Yeah.
Our mission in this deep dive is to understand why this feeling exists. We'll be looking at our evolutionary history, the nature of modern expectations, drawing from our source material, humancapability.pdf.
Exactly. We're going to unpack how our brains, which, evolved for much smaller social circles, handle today's vast and complex networks.
Right.
We'll explore why a lot of the confidence we see around us might be, well, more of a performance than reality.
Okay.
We'll also get into the fundamental mismatch between what modern life demands and what our inherent capabilities are, and we'll use a fun analogy to illustrate that.
Looking forward to that.
Plus, we'll look at the growing difference between people who seem to be thriving and those just sort of trying to stay afloat. And we'll finish by pulling out some practical ideas to help you navigate all of this.
So this isn't about just dwelling on the problems. Think of it as gaining a much clearer picture of the forces at play. Our goal is to give you some solid insights that you can actually use, leaving you feeling, hopefully, more empowered and clear-headed. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's go right back to our roots, how we evolved.
Well, what's fascinating to consider is the scale of human social organization for, most of our history. The document we're exploring brings up Dunbar's number, that cognitive limit of around 100 to 150 stable social relationships.
Right, 150, I've heard that.
Yeah. Our brains developed in the context of smaller tribal societies, relatively straightforward social structures. We were designed to recognize a limited number of people and probably only deeply trust a much, much smaller group.
Right, a world of familiar faces where social dynamics, while I'm sure intricate, were on a scale we could manage.
Exactly.
Now, contrast that with today. You've got potentially thousands of connections through social media, work, various communities.
Which is huge.
We're part of massive organizations, global economies, and we're constantly bombarded with information notifications popping up, ads everywhere, news cycles that just never stop. It's a fundamentally different environment for our brains.
And the consequences, as the paper points out, are significant. This constant bombardment of stimuli, it overwhelms the brain circuits designed for those smaller, more predictable environments. It leads to a chronic state of low-grade stress, that feeling of being perpetually on.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
We see social exhaustion, that utterly drained feeling after a day of meetings or just endless scrolling. Chronic anxiety becomes almost the norm. And perhaps most telling is this widespread sense of self-doubt, the feeling of, not measuring up.
Which is a really key point in the document. This feeling of inferiority might actually be a natural reaction to these totally unnatural metrics we're constantly being evaluated against. It's like we're holding ourselves to standards that weren't really part of our original human blueprint.
Precisely.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
This idea that maybe a lot of what we perceive as competence around us isn't quite as solid as it looks.
Yes. This leads us to what are known as the illusion of transparency and pluralistic ignorance.
Okay, break those down.
So the illusion of transparency is the tendency to overestimate how much others can see our internal state, our anxieties, our doubts.
Right, I think everyone knows I'm nervous.
Exactly. We tend to think our insecurities are much more obvious than they actually are. Then there's pluralistic ignorance.
Okay.
Which happens when we mistakenly believe we're the only ones who don't understand something because everyone else is acting as if they do, like in a confusing meeting.
Oh, yeah. Everyone nods along, but inside you're thinking, what is going on? And you assume you're the only one?
You got it. It's like this unspoken agreement where most people feel a bit unsure, but assume everyone else has it all figured out.
And the document outlines the defense mechanisms that creates things like confidence theater, where people act extra confident to hide their insecurities. And of course, imposter syndrome, that ongoing fear of being found out despite evidence you're doing okay.
And let's not overlook judgmentalism, which the source material very astutely frames as a projection of our own insecurities.
How so?
Well, by being critical of others, thinking they're not good enough or they're faking it, we might subconsciously try to boost our own sense of security.
Makes sense. Sort of a defense.
But as the paper clearly illustrates, this sets up a negative feedback loop. Insecurity leads to faked confidence, which creates a fear of exposure, prompting us to judge others. ultimately fueling even more insecurity. It's fascinating and, when you think about it, quite a common cycle.
Absolutely. It really shines a light on why sometimes the people who seem the most self-assured might actually be wrestling with the biggest internal doubts. Okay, so let's switch gears and dig into this idea of unrealistic modern expectations.
Yeah.
The document uses a really insightful analogy here, comparing it to Dungeons& and Dragons stats.
Yeah. This is a helpful way to visualize the mismatch. Think about the intelligence stat.
Yeah.
In modern life, there's this pressure to memorize vast amounts of information across different fields, solve complex problems instantly.
Right, be an expert in everything.
Kind of. But our brains really evolved for practical, narrative, contextual learning,
Yeah.
not this abstract, constant multitasking that's often demanded.
So it's like we're trying to run the wrong software.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
We're trying to use a database-optimized brain for a world that demands constant real-time processing and novelty. It leads to feelings of inadequacy even when we're capable.
Exactly. Then you have strength. We're often pushed to achieve an aesthetic ideal of fitness.
Yep, the gym body.
While spending most of our days in jobs that are largely sedentary. But our ancestors' strength came from the natural everyday movements of survival, walking long distances, manual labor.
Hitting the gym is a deliberate act. It's not the inherent way our bodies were designed to be used day to day.
Makes sense. What about dexterity?
Consider dexterity. Modern life values rapid typing, gaming prowess, intricate technical skills. But our fine motor skills primarily evolved for survival tasks, crafting tools, handling food. The highly specialized dexterity we see today is a relatively recent development.
And constitution. This one feels big. The expectation to endure chronic stress, pollution, overwork without breaking down emotionally.
Right. Our stress response system evolved for short bursts, the fight-or-flight reaction to immediate danger.
Like running from a predator.
Exactly, not the sustained low-level anxiety that many of us experience daily. Our bodies just aren't designed to handle that long-term. It potentially leads to physical and mental health issues.
Okay, wisdom.
Wisdom is another crucial area. We're expected to have deep social-emotional insight, manage complicated personal finances, navigate careers, family, mental health, often in isolation.
Trying to figure it all out ourselves.
Yeah. Historically, wisdom was cultivated through communal learning from elders, passed down through generations within close-knit communities. Now, it's largely a DIY solo endeavor.
And finally, charisma.
Charisma. The modern world often requires us to constantly charm strangers, perform well in meetings, sell ourselves in networking situations.
Yawn all the time.
Pretty much. But human charisma, in its evolutionary context, was far more about building deep bonds and trust within small groups, not this continuous performative networking.
So the core insight from this D&D analogy is really powerful. We are, in many ways, being asked to excel at a game with rules and demands that are fundamentally out of sync with our inherent evolutionary strengths and capabilities.
That's the crux of it. Which naturally leads to the question, what happens when life becomes increasingly convenient? Does that impact our overall competence?
That's a really interesting point, and the document offers a nuanced perspective. When it comes to specific survival skills, like fixing things, growing food, basic navigation.
Yeah, the practical stuff.
The answer seems to be largely yes. Those skills are becoming less common. Fewer people possess that practical, hands-on knowledge.
However, in highly specialized niche areas, we're actually seeing the opposite. Small groups of individuals are developing incredibly advanced skills.
Like coding, finance, design.
Exactly. Fields like that. Convenience removes the necessity for a broad base of basic skills, and as the paper suggests, necessity is a powerful driver of adaptation.
So it's almost as if we're trading a general set of competencies for hyper-specialization in certain areas.
That's a good way to put it. And the document also brings up an important consideration about fragility.
Yes, increased comfort can lead to decreased resilience, both psychologically and physically.
Right. When we don't encounter regular challenges and our needs are just readily met, we may become less able to cope with adversity when it does hit.
So while modern humans might have more specialized knowledge, we could also be more vulnerable in some fundamental ways compared to our ancestors.
It's a paradox, isn't it?
It really is. This brings us to the idea of a growing divide between optimizers and autopiloters.
This is a really insightful distinction the paper makes. The optimizers are those who are actively using modern tools, online learning, technology, community building, to consciously improve their skills and overall well-being. They tend to be proactive, curious, and kind of disciplined in their approach.
Okay. And on the other hand, you have the autopiloters.
Right. These are individuals who often feel overwhelmed, perhaps cynical or numb, and tend to react to life rather than actively shaping it.
They're sort of getting swept along.
Exactly. They feel drained by the demands of the system instead of empowered by it.
And the document emphasizes that the widening gap between these two groups isn't necessarily about inherent intelligence or laziness,
No, that's key.
but more about how effectively they manage their psychological state in the face of these modern pressures.
Right. The optimizers aren't superhuman. They've often just developed better coping and growth strategies. The autopiloters aren't necessarily lacking potential. They may simply be exhausted by the constant overstimulation and maybe a lack of clear purpose or agency.
Which makes sense. When we're faced with these seemingly impossible expectations, our brains have ways of trying to protect us. Don't they?
Absolutely. The document outlines several key psychological defense mechanisms. There's cognitive dissonance.
Okay, like justifying something that doesn't quite fit.
Yeah, where we rationalize conflicting beliefs or actions, like deciding we didn't really want that promotion after not getting it, to reduce the sting.
Got it.
Then there's projection, where we attribute our own unacceptable thoughts or feelings onto others. Defensive confidence is another one, overcompensating with outward bravado, maybe through excessive self-promotion.
The confidence theater we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. And of course, imposter syndrome, that persistent feeling of being a fraud despite your achievements.
And the crucial insight here, as the document presents it, is that these aren't necessarily character flaws.
Right.
They're more like survival instincts, our brains attempting to shield us from chronic existential uncertainty in a world that often feels overwhelming.
Which, unfortunately, can contribute to states like burnout, cynicism, and learned helplessness.
Yeah, tell me about that connection.
Because, as the paper notes, we aren't wired for indefinite, directionless effort. When we're constantly striving without clear rewards or a sense of completion, it can lead to burnout, that feeling of exhaustion from trying to meet endless demands without sufficient recovery.
Just running on empty.
Precisely. Cynicism can become a form of psychological armor, right?
Mm-hmm.
A way to protect ourselves from ongoing disappointment by convincing ourselves that nothing really matters anyway.
A defense against hoping too much.
You could say that. And learned helplessness after repeated experiences of feeling unable to influence outcomes can lead people to just stop trying altogether, even when opportunities for positive change might actually arise.
Modern life, with its often abstract and confusing challenges, can unfortunately create fertile ground for these states.
Very much so. And we also need to consider the impact of status anxiety.
Ooh, yeah. That feels particularly relevant now.
Absolutely. It's a particularly acute issue in our hyper-connected world. Historically, in smaller tribal societies, status was local and visible. You had a clear sense of your standing within your community.
You knew where you fit.
Pretty much. Today, status is global and seemingly limitless. Thanks to media, social media, there's always someone who appears richer, smarter, more successful based on some metric somewhere.
And this constant awareness can breed status anxiety, the persistent fear of falling behind in a competition that doesn't really have a finish line.
And it feels relative deprivation, where we feel dissatisfied not necessarily because of our own circumstances, but because others seem to have more or be happier.
Yeah, the comparison trap.
Exactly. And as the document points out, social media acts as a powerful amplifier of these feelings. It just magnifies everything.
It's worth remembering, though, that humans have grappled with feelings of inadequacy throughout history. The specifics change, but the feeling isn't totally new, right?
That's a great point. The document provides some interesting historical parallels. In ancient civilizations with rigid social hierarchies, most people were kind of resigned to a life of labor with little hope of moving up.
So meaning was found elsewhere.
Often found in local traditions, community, religion, rather than individual achievement as we think of it now.
Okay. Then ancient Greece and Rome.
There, with the growing emphasis on individual achievement, citizenship, philosophy, we see the first philosophical writings that really touch on concepts like hubris, envy, the burdens of ambition, the pressure to stand out emerged in a new way.
Interesting.
The Industrial Revolution brought its own set of challenges, right? Machines taking over human labor, urbanization leading to social isolation, terrible working conditions.
Big societal shifts.
Huge. This period saw widespread social unrest and movements aimed at restoring human dignity in the face of dehumanizing work.
And finally, the post-World War II era.
Well, with the expansion of the middle class, particularly in the West, and the surge in consumer expectations driven by advertising. It created endless new benchmarks for success, keeping up with the Joneses.
Right.
This contributed to the rise of modern existentialism, that search for meaning in a world that can often feel meaningless or materialistic.
So this feeling has deep roots, just different flavors over time. Considering all of this, what are some practical strategies? How do we navigate this reality?
The document offers a really helpful set of guiding principles. One key idea is to localize status and meaning.
Okay, what does that look like?
Instead of comparing yourself to everyone on a global scale, focus on a smaller group of people whose opinions you truly value. And choose areas of focus that are genuinely important to you.
Like being a supportive friend or mastering a particular skill, maybe in a hobby?
Exactly. Things that have intrinsic value to you, not just external validation.
Okay, what else?
Another crucial point is to manage your energy, not just your time.
Energy management, important.
Very. Being efficient isn't enough. We need to prioritize rest and be mindful of how we manage our dopamine levels. Maybe limiting excessive stimulation from things like endless social media scrolling.
So scheduling focused work, but also scheduling actual rest.
Yes, and engaging in truly restorative leisure activities, not just passive consumption.
Got it. Micro-competence.
The concept of microcompetence is also valuable, instead of trying to be good at everything.
Which is impossible.
Right. Focus on achieving mastery in a few key areas. Let depth, rather than breadth, be your guiding principle. Find something you can really sink your teeth into and get good at.
Makes sense. Build confidence through actual skill.
Precisely. And finally, practicing existential integrity.
Existential integrity. Sounds deep.
It is, but it's practical too. It means living in a way that aligns with your personal values and creates a sense of meaning, even when things feel uncertain.
How do you do that?
By accepting that external validation will never be completely satisfying. Actively cultivating meaning through relationships, meaningful work, acts of kindness, and also accepting imperfection in yourself and the world.
Okay, those are solid frameworks. Now, how can you tell if you're operating more on autopilot versus living in a more intentional, optimized way? How do you diagnose yourself, so to speak?
Well, the core difference, as the document emphasizes, lies in whether your choices and actions are driven by conscious intention or by external pressures and habitual reactions.
Intentional versus reactive.
Exactly. Living in an optimized way means your behaviors align with your values, growth feels meaningful, and you manage your energy deliberately. Autopilot, on the other hand, is characterized by reacting to external demands where growth feels pointless and energy is just drained reactively.
Okay. And the document provides a really useful set of 7 self-reflection questions, right?
Yes, they're great prompts. Things like, do I know what I'm aiming for in the coming month there? A no answer here might suggest you're drifting without clearly defined goals.
Okay, that's a good one. What else?
Or, are my daily actions connected to my core values? A no could indicate that your time is being consumed by urgent but not necessarily important tasks, things that don't really matter to you deep down.
Right. Just putting out fires.
Exactly. Other questions include, am I actively learning something new that challenges me? Do I regularly experience a sense of meaningful effort? Can I identify 3 things I've consciously chosen to eliminate to protect my energy?
Ooh, the elimination one is tough but important.
Very. Also, when I rest, do I feel genuinely restored? And do I have a small circle of people who truly know my aspirations and struggles? Primarily, no answers across these might suggest you're operating more on autopilot.
And the document also lists some telltale signs that you might be in autopilot without realizing it.
Yeah, things like confusing being busy with making actual progress. Just motion, not necessarily advancement.
And there.
Haven't we all? Constantly wishing to just get through the week.
Yeah.
Engaging in mindless consumption, endless scrolling, binge watching during your downtime, procrastinating on important goals, and even feeling negative towards the ambitions of others. That can be a sign too.
It's important to remember, though, as the doc points out, that being on autopilot isn't a moral failing.
Not at all. It's often a natural, adaptive response to feeling overwhelmed, a coping mechanism.
Right. So what are the signs of living more intentionally then? The contrast.
In contrast, the signs of living more intentionally include motivation that stems from a sense of purpose, not just obligation.
Feeling pulled, not just pushed.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Feeling tired after effort, maybe, but not emotionally empty or hollow. Experiencing genuine personal growth, even if it's slow. Being able to say no without excessive guilt.
Setting boundaries.
Crucial. And having a sense of your own direction, your own why, even when facing difficult days or setbacks.
And there's even a quick gut check exercise mentioned.
Yeah, a simple one. Imagine someone you deeply respect observing you for an entire week. Every meeting, every interaction, how you spend your evenings.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Would you feel a sense of pride or maybe embarrassment or just emptiness about what they would see? Your initial gut reaction can be a powerful indicator of how aligned your actions are with your values.
That's a potent visualization.
It can be.
So, to summarize, this feeling of being overwhelmed or inadequate in modern life, it isn't necessarily a personal failing.
Not necessarily at all. It's often a natural consequence of the significant mismatch between our evolved human nature and the often unrealistic demands of the modern world.
We encourage you, the listener, to think about those self-reflection questions.
Yeah.
Maybe revisit them later. And consider which of the practical frameworks resonate most with you.
Yeah, what games do you truly want to engage in? What metrics of success are genuinely meaningful to you, not just what society tells you?
Ultimately, it's about consciously choosing our own paths and defining our own measures of success in a world that often presents infinite and frequently unattainable expectations.
And maybe asking yourself, how can I cultivate meaning and agency in the face of these pressures? That's the ongoing journey, really, for all of us navigating this complex modern life.